our schus to have Rabbi Avrohom Gordimer, a rabbinical coordinator at the OU for many, many, many years, who focuses on cheese and dairy at the OU. So he's involved in many, many companies and is, if I'm allowed to say, Rabbi Gordimer is an anav, a bucky in these topics. We've been learning the sugyas and daf yomi of Chalav Akum and Gevinas Akum. What better schus is it for us to hear what's going on at the OU and around the kashrus world with cheeses and milks and dairy? So we're going to have a question-answer format. I'm going to ask a few questions that came in. We offered our listeners to share some questions. We got some interesting questions, which Rabbi Gordimer agreed to spend a few minutes. And thank you again for taking some time to answer the questions. So maybe just before we begin, Rabbi Gordimer, do you want to share with us, what you've been doing at the OU, just brief background of how you got into this, perhaps even?
So I've been at the OU for 28 and a half years so far. And when I arrived here, I was told the first day I will be handling the dairy industry. I don't handle all the dairy companies here. We have many, many hundreds of them, but I handle about 106 or 107 dairy accounts. And that's my basically full-time portfolio here. And that's what I've been doing for the past 2.5 decades or more.
So perhaps at the end, you'll tell us how maybe things have changed from 28 years that you've been there, when you started to now. So let's get to the first question. The first question is as follows. The writer writes, surely if the milk and cheese is prepared from kosher animals and no meat, gelatin, hormones are used in setting the cheese, there should be no problem with Jewish people consuming these products. I see no reason why it is necessary to use only Chalav Yisroel or specifically cheese, which has a heter. So, Rabbi Gordimer, how do you respond to this question?
So let me deal first, Rabbi Shwed, if you don't mind, with the heter on cheese question. There's a gezerah from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, the Mishnah on Chav Tes and Beis, the Gemara discusses on Lamed Hey and Aleph and more about Gevinas Akum and Gevinas Yisroel. Gevinas Akum. Gevinas Akum means cheese that has not been made with proper, Jewish involvement or supervision. There's a machlokas poskim whether or not it means that the Yid has to supervise the cheese making, watch the cheese making to make sure that the ingredients, in particular the rennet, the coagulant, which can come from animal stomachs, is kosher, or to make sure, or the Jew has to actually put the rennet into the cheese. We're talking about kosher, normally microbial, non-meat, synthetic type of rennet. So therefore, this gezerah about Gevinas Akum, that you're not allowed to have cheese unless you have Yid either supervising the cheese or involved in the cheese making, which includes the supervision of it, that precludes buying so-called regular cheese, even if you happen to know that the ingredients appear kosher and so forth. Unless it was made with special supervision, it's Gevinas Akum, it's usher, it's forbidden.
So just adding or explaining what you're saying is the fact that we'll get to soon, right? There's a Teshuva from Moshe Feinstein that says that perhaps in countries where there's government oversight, that acts as if, right, there maybe was a Jew there, perhaps seeing, that's not going to help the gezerah of any type of cheese-making ingredient, any type of rennet being kosher and using Rav Moshe's heter for that.
That's correct. I'll explain a little bit further if you don't mind, please. There are two reasons why Rav Moshe's heter will not help for Gevina, for cheese. For milk, it will help. It can help if that's the approach you take, but for cheese, it will not help. There are two reasons. Number one is that Rav Moshe's heter is concerning the fact that the government does not allow, in the case of milk, the milking of, or the intermingling of milk from animals other than cows or whatever into the milk supply. However, in the case of cheese, the government does allow companies to use rennet coming from non-kosher animal stomachs. I mean, it could be kosher animals, but they're not kosher slaughter, kosher processed. It's perfectly fine. There are cheeses, most cheeses in mainland Europe actually are made traditionally with real meat rennet from Orkevis Navela, from non-shechted animal stomachs. There's no malicha, there's no nikur, there's total ester. These are meat stomachs, and this how rennet is made in Europe in most places, used in most places. Even in America, there are specialty cheeses, organic cheeses often that have meat rennet. So there's nothing that precludes that by the government. The government is not checking to make sure the rennet is from a kosher source, a synthetic rennet with an OU symbol on it or whatever. The second thing is that the halacha in terms of milk is that for all we really require is that we have a knowledge. Machlokas how you derive this. We have to have a working knowledge to verify, make us assured of the fact that there's no non-kosher animal milk in the milk. And therefore, the Shulchan Aruch says, as we've just learned recently, that you can have the Yehudi, the Yid, even outside of the stable, yes, outside of the milking parlor, not a problem because he sees no non-kosher animals are entering the milking parlor. And so too, the Shach says in Yoredeya, this is Kuf Tesvav Sif Aleph, he says the Yotze v'nichnas, have a Mashiach going in and out, but not the entire time, suffices for milk supervision, for whole supervision. By cheese, you do not find that. By cheese, there's no dispensation that the Mashiach doesn't have to be there the whole time watching. The Ramah says he has to watch the cheese making. No one says Yotze v'nichnas, he can pop in and out. As long as he knows that the rennet is good, that doesn't help. He has to physically be there watching the rennet, watching the cheese making throughout, or being involved in the cheese making throughout. There's no dispensation, there's no heter as applies to milk.
Is there any conversation, just following up on what you just said, by cheese, that watching is enough, or you mentioned involvement? Is there any practical applications? Are we machmir for one, or it's the chatchila to do either one?
Normally, kashrus agencies are machmir like the Shach to require them, and many Rishonim who agree with the Shach, that the Mashiach has to actually put the rennet into the cheese, into the vat, the milk vat that makes the cheese. However, the Ikra Din, Rav Moshe Paskin, like the Yehuda, is like the Ramah, which is the Re'iyah. Watching the cheese making suffices as a Mashiach. The Mashiach makes sure no ingredients are non-kosher. And therefore, cheese companies, when possible, will go according to the Shach, and Mashiach will actually either pour the rennet in or he'll activate it with clicking the match, the rennet feed into the cheese vat. And if not, the Mashiach will be there to observe, to watch the entire time the cheese being made. The Chalav Stam companies, they are machmir always like the Shach. The Mashiach is always putting in the rennet, clicking the mouse, or pouring the rennet into the vat. Whereas in Chalav Stam cheeses, it depends. Kashrus agencies do their best to fulfill the Shach, but if it's not possible, Ikra Din, which they're allowed to follow, they do follow, and the Mashiach will be there the entire time watching the cheese making, supervising it.
Okay, excellent. Let's move on to the next question. Rav Moshe Feinstein, as we mentioned, was famously matir Chalav Akum. Let's not say Chalav Akum because that's not true. He was matir Chalav Stam, and I'm curious when I get to the end of this question if you could just comment on where the terminology Stam came from. Is there a source for that? But not Chalav Akum. Chalav Akum is Aser. He was famously matir Chalav Stam in reliance on government supervision, but still felt that a Baal Nefesh should be machmir. This you could see in the Teshuva. Rabbi Gordimer probably knows which one it is. I don't remember offhand, but I'll mention it. In the past few decades, as technology has drastically progressed, the level of oversight that government agencies now can have has, of course, progressed from 24/7 camera monitoring to chemical compound testing, etc. This being the case, is there still a reason why a Baal Nefesh should be machmir? Now, I just want to, before Rabbi Gordimer answers the question, perhaps give us some context of when and how this Teshuva was written. And you know what? I think I'm going to just jump to the next question because it's really the same conversation. The next question was, how come there are people taking the leniency of Rav Moshe out of context and using Chalav Stam when Chalav Yisroel is widely available? So let's just jump in and answer these, talk about Rav Moshe's Teshuva and when Rav Moshe's Teshuva was said, and I guess the practical aspects, right? How is Rav Moshe's Teshuva applicable today? And is it better today? Is it different today? And then, there's a lot of hearsay and different opinions and different stories of how Rav Moshe actually was naik. So I think there's an interesting topic just for Limud HaTorah to learn and understand and hear.
Yeah, sure. Moshe's Teshuvas, there's a series of 3 Teshuvas in Yoredeya and Chelik Aleph. In Ikras Moshe, there are Teshuvas later as well, but those are the foundational Teshuvas about this topic. Those are written in the 1950s. And in those days, Chalav Yisroel was not widely available like today. Today, you can go to a supermarket. There are many brands of Chalav Yisroel. Milk available in a New York City or Lakewood or Muncie or Passaic supermarket, and Chalav Yisroel cheeses and yogurts and butters. There are among many brands of big varieties available. In some of these stores, most stores, there is a lot more Chalav Yisroel product available than there is Chalav Stam, non-Chalav Yisroel product in most of these stores from neighborhoods. But be that as it is, in Rav Moshe's time, the technicalities of it. The way it worked is that very often the farms were actually attached to the dairy, to the milk processing plants that actually were bottling, pasteurizing, homogenizing, and bottling the milk. The farms were on site. And the farms that weren't on site as well, and those farms were mostly inspected by the government. By the way, the state government is the main inspector in terms of dairy, whether it's the farms, whether it's the facilities, whether it's even the tankers, the trucks that carry the milk. The federal government's involved as well in inspecting, but the states handle the bulk of inspections. But in Rav Moshe's times, again, the factories, the dairies, the processing plants were very often had farms attached to them. And if not, there were farms transporting the milk, through with tankers, and most of the farms were inspected, but some were not inspected. And Rabbi Moshe's idea was that there's an ansade. There's an idea in halacha that literally we are witnesses. We know this is to be the case. It's like we're aiding to it. We're witnesses ourselves to it. That the milk we know is not coming from behemoth tbeos, from non-kosher animals, from horses or donkeys or camels or whatever else it might be. Because the government is inspecting the dairies and they're inspecting the farms and so forth. Rabbi Moshe held, by the way, also that even though some farms in his time were not inspected, farms that contribute their milk to the commercial dairy industry, those farms, though, were not a problem because Rabbi Moshe held that the Isra of Chalav Akum pertains at the point of contact between the seller and the Jewish consumer. And therefore, if you're buying something from the seller, from the dairy, let's say, buying a bottle of milk, at that point, Chalav Akum will pertain. When the milk is at the farm, before it even gets to dairy to be pasteurized, homogenized, and bottled, Chalav Akum did not apply to the milk. The milk is still mutter. There's no gzera. Most milk is from cows. There's a row of most milk from cows. No problem. That's the scenario Moshe's time. Today, those things are different. There's more to say, but there's two things I want to say. Number one is that today, all the farms that provide milk to the commercial dairy industry are inspected. They're inspected, and it's not like in Moshe's time that most were, some were not. Say they all are. Some farms are not inspected. Those farms are private farms that do not provide to the commercial dairy industry. But all the industrial farms are inspected today. And not only are they inspected, but the tankers are inspected as well. And there's a whole trail. When a tanker comes to take milk from a farm to a dairy, the bottling facility, besides loading up with milk, they'll also take a small flask, a small like lab sample of milk from the farm, and that lab sample, that little flask will be coded. It'll have a barcode on it, and when the tanker arrives at the dairy, the people who receive the milk, before they can unload the milk, the people in the lab will take that flask that has the barcode from the farm, and they will scan it to make sure this farm is in the system. It's an inspected farm in the system. So therefore, you have really a real good verification from the farm to the facility. And besides that, the tankers today are inspected as well for all their loads to make sure the loads they were hauling were acceptable loads from inspected farms, government inspected farms. So the system really is thoroughly, from A to Z covered in terms of inspections. However, though, some Sofer and other postim, they held not like Rav Moshe, which is that you have on Sadeh, you don't have to have the Mashiach physically being there, Rav Moshe had. You have an Sadeh, we have a virtual witnessing, virtual hashgacha on the milk. Some Sofer and others hold that no, Chazal made it takana, made it gezerah, like it says in the Mishnah of Avodah Zarah, that you have to Yisrael Roehu. Yisrael must see the milking. You can't circumvent that. We have much knowledge. We might have video cameras in every single second. We might have all the knowledge in the world. But if we haven't fulfilled Chazal Sakana, having a Mashiach there at the milking, that milk is not permissible. That's why those who do not accept the heter of Chalav Stam, it's not that they suspect, today at least, that there's tampering and bribery, at least in America. The system is good. It's a good system. But the question is whether it fulfills the Takana of Chazal for Re'iyah of the milking of Chaliva. And that's really what the Machlokas is holding.
Fascinating. Again, this is for Limud HaTorah. Could you share with us, some of the conversation and tshuvas that have been written and talked about what Rav Moshe meant about Nefesh being machmir?
Sure. Rav Moshe himself writes Bal Nefesh Yachmir. Bal Nefesh, who's on the higher madrega and extra strict, should be machmir, should drink all the Chalav Yisroel, which means milk that's been supervised with a Mashiach there. And for most of chinuch, for yeshivas and so forth, to mechanech the children into this halacha, into the fact that there is such a gezerah about milk, they should also be machmir. However, though, there are various documents, various statements out there, how much Moshe really lechatchila was permitting Chalav Stam, as we call it, regular milk, or how much he really held.Maybe it's only if need be, if you have no choice. There are different opinions about that, but that's something I really shouldn't get into more. But there's talk
and
to
there's
people
also
out there.
all kinds of people know Rav Moshe's family. They're here. You could ask them. There's different stories about Rav Moshe's own family and his sons and grandchildren. So someone who's interested, there's more to discuss on the topic.
Go to the direct source, exactly.
Okay. One more thing. Do you know where who quoted Chalav Stam, like where that actual language came from?
I'm not sure. Moshe talks about Chalav HaKompany. He writes in Yiddish, Chalav HaKompanies. Chalav Stam probably, I assume, means regular milk. Regular milk in America, unlike in some old primitive societies in which there were, donkeys and camels and horses being milked and so forth on small farms. Today, the regular stam, the regular situation is the milk is coming from cows from normal industrial farms, and I think that's where this terminology comes from.
Excellent. Okay, and the fourth question that we have here, you've covered also, which was regarding Chalav Akum or Chalav Stam. Right, R Moshe's leniency was based on the U.S. Department of Health, how they run their inspections, and the person wanted to know how those inspections run. Are they different today? And you've just answered that question. Fine. So thank you. Before we wrap up, Rabbi Gordimer, these are the questions that people asked. Could you share with us, a couple of items that might be interesting that people have not asked, that it's going on in the dairy world at the OU and in the kashrus world?
I'll do my best. Taking a step back, this is not a new issue, but it's an issue people should be aware of, that the Gezerah of Gevinas Akum. So the main reason the Gemara mentions many reasons for it, suggested reasons, and the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, they adopt the reason of Shmuel, because maybe the cheesemaker was mamid with the cheese with or kevis nevela, with the meat, the vela meat from an animal's stomach, from the cave of the abdomen in the fourth stomach section. And therefore, the cheese is also, it's a dover mamid, this or kevis nevela, and that's the reason this adopted. The question is, what kind of cheeses were Chazal referring to when they asked Gevinas Akum? Obviously, they're referring to cheeses that have this issue, have a concern of or kevis nevela. We call hard cheeses. In the industry, they call rennet set cheeses. Like cheddar, Edam, Gouda, Munster, Parmesan, Swiss cheeses that use a real rennet enzyme. We use, again, the kosher rule, we use a synthetic microbial rennet, but it's a rennet, this rennet activity going on with this enzyme. What about cheeses such as cream cheese, cottage cheese, that don't use rennet? Sometimes they contain a slight amount of rennet to hasten the coagulation or make it firmer, but they don't need rennet. They're made without rennet normally, these cheeses. Pork, farmer's cheese, pot cheese, all these so-called soft cheeses. They're acid-set cheeses. They're made through acidification of milk, not through any enzymes, really. That's not necessary for them. There's the apply there. So there's a famous machlokas postum going back a long time, and there rise actually from the Rishonim, how you learn the Gemara, as to whether or not these soft cheeses have the Isra Gevinas Akum pertaining to them or not. So the the national kashrus agencies, their position is like that of Rav Henkin, which is that Chazal really assered hard cheeses, rennet set cheeses, since the Gezerah is lest or kevis nevela be used, and that only applies to rennet set cheeses. Therefore, only for these types of cheeses do we have a mashgiach tamidim. And mashgiach tamidim for every production of cheddar and Munster and Edam and Gouda and Swiss and Parmesan and so forth. However, for cottage cheese and cream cheese, the national kashrus agencies, most of them, do not require mashgiach tamidi. Just yotzev v'nichnas, mashgiach coming often, but not the entire time. Make sure the equipment and the ingredients used, whether it's the cultures, the stabilizers, and so forth for these various soft cheeses, make sure they're kosher. But there's no need to have mashgiach on site for Gevinas Akum. However, though, some poskim, including the Chachmas Adam, the Aruch HaShulchan, and others, they say the Gezerah applied to all cheeses, even if the cheeses don't use rennet. They're called Gevina, and the Gezerah applies. And therefore, the some kashrus agencies, called the Hamisha Hashgachas, they actually have a mashgiach present for full time for every production of cottage cheese and cream cheese and so forth. Not only that, the mashgiach there will actually add the coagulant. He'll add the acidification medium. He'll add whether they're using vinegar or use the acid cultures. When they make these cheeses, the mashgiach will either to supervise and to add these cultures into the cheeses. And even for yogurts, even the hamish hashgachas for yogurts, mashgiach there normally add the yogurt culture into the vat for yogurt production.
Very interesting. Just to follow up on that, so are there dairy products out there that maybe Chalav Yisroel that only have an OU, which doesn't have this, is not going with the opinion of the Chachmas Adam and the Aruch HaShulchan? Or if something is out there and it's OU and it's Chalav Yisroel, it will have, the Mila or the Chumrah, if you want to call it that, of those Paiskim.
I can only speak domestically. All the domestic OU Chalav Yisroel products will have this chumrah implied, 100%. Anything we certify of Chalav Yisroel, it's on a mahadran. Everything we do is mahadran in terms of the level of mashgichim and the level of the pikuach and the ingredients. Everything is mahadran. But in terms of this special heter of Chalav Yisroel, anything that's catering to the Chalav Yisroel consumer base will have all the hidurim applied, the additional hidurim that otherwise, most wouldn't expect.
Interesting. I know we didn't talk about this prior, but as you were speaking and mentioning hard cheeses, perhaps you could share just a couple of minutes. There's, at least for me, there's sometimes confusion. What kind of hard cheeses are required for a person to wait 6 hours after they eat them? You want to share something on that?
Yeah, sure. There are really two categories. The poskim mentioned two reasons why a person would wait after cheese. The Ramah in Shulchan Aruch mentioned Gevinas Kasha, and the poskim say it means age Vav Chadashim, which means approximately 6 months. It doesn't have to be 6 months to day. Like Rabbi told me, approximately 6 months. It doesn't have to be, there's no countdown clock for the 6-month period, but that's one thing. Hard cheeses. When cheeses are hard, it's not just the way they become hard is because they're aged. When they're aged, the longer they're aged, the more brittle and dehydrated they become. The moisture, the liquid in the cheese curd evaporates, and the cheese become hard and brittle. So cheese that have been aged approximately 6 months, one should wait after, wait 6 hours or whatever your period. If you're yucky, wait 3 hours, whatever it would be before having meat. However, there's another reason mentioned by poskim. Taz mentioned this, other mentioned Chalav Stam. There's a very potent aftertaste for the after eating certain cheeses. Even if they're not aged, certain cheeses have a very potent aftertaste. These two reasons, parenthetically, they go back to the machlokus about waiting after eating basar before having chalav. The Rambam mentions basar ben hashinayim, cheese meat that's stuck to the teeth. It takes 6 hours or however long it is to dislodge properly from the teeth, from the palate. As Rashi mentioned in Mashiachas Tam, there's a strong aftertaste of meat. Or if you have to wait 6 hours, or whatever the shear you keep is, before having milk. So these two reasons apply to cheese as well. So any cheeses that are either aged approximately 6 months, therefore they became more brittle and more hard, more dehydrated, they stick to the mouth better, or cheese that have a very pungent taste, noticeably pungent taste, and you have to wait after. Some applications would be as follows. Parmesan cheese by law, regular Parmesan, has to be aged 10 months. Otherwise, you cannot call it Parmesan cheese. After Parmesan, you have to wait. I asked Rabbi, what about grated Parmesan? He said, even after grated Parmesan, you should wait. It's the same texture. It's smaller, tinier pieces, but the same sticking to the mouth, so to say, applies. It's a very hard, brittle cheese. You have to wait. Regular cheddar cheese is called mild cheddar in the industry, and that's not aged 6 months. It's aged 3 or 4 months at maximum. However, any cheese cheddar that doesn't say the word mild, or that doesn't say the word just cheddar, it says semi-aged, semi-hard, semi-sharp, sharp. You have to always wait. Those are always aged 6 months or much more. There's a whole OU cheese list online. I think it's an aged cheese list. If you Google it, you'll find it. In terms of cheese that are not aged, or might not be aged, but have a Mashiachas Tam, a pungent taste to them, I asked Rabelsky about this. Blue cheese apparently you wait after. Danish blue cheese, he told me the consumer it's only aged 2.5 months. Rabelsky told me the consumer should test themselves. Some of them actually have a pungent taste, some of them have less pungent taste. It really depends. There are fewer cheeses that have a pungency to their tastes than there are cheeses that are aged. A lot of cheeses are aged. Very pungent cheeses in the kosher market don't exist as much. They exist, but not so much. Rabelsky told me as a little boy, he remembers his father took from Lower East Side to buy kosher Limburger cheese, which is very pungent. It's a stinky cheese, but you can't buy kosher Limburger today. It doesn't exist. So most of these very pungent cheeses do not have a kosher form. Some of them do. You have to be careful about it. Check the list, please. But that's the basics about this.
Okay, so thank you for getting some chulin into our Avodah Zarah conversation. Much appreciated. Okay, thank you, Rabbi Gordimer. And I'm hoping that the people who have just learned the Daf Yomi Sugyas and those who are just interested in some of the Chalav Akum, Gevinas Akum will benefit from this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.